Jetzt, ja, moin.
Hi, morgen.
Hi.
Moin.
Welcome to our Azure AMA and the Azure Clinic, and I have the pleasure to welcome 3 MVPs on my side. So, and I will say, one moment.
We have to fight with the technical problems.
As always. Challenge.
It's a little bit challenging here. So, Thomas, will you introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. My name is Thomas Nonna. I'm a Microsoft MVP and Cloud Security Architect. I'm working for können, GAB. And I had the pleasure to spend the week with some friends and MVP followers, and looking forward for your questions regarding Azure AD or Azure Security.
Perfect. Eric.
Eric, next.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Next.
Yeah, hi, I'm Eric. I'm based in the wonderful city of Weimar. I'm an enterprise cloud architect for a small little company called CGI. Been an MVP since 2015, doing a lot of Azure stuff, but also hybrid cloud stuff like Azure Stack and still a little bit of System Center sometimes. And yeah, happy to be here. And as you see, we are in person in a room, which is pretty awesome.
Absolutely.
Which also shows us the problems of technology if you're not in your home office anymore. But yeah, glad to be here and looking forward to your questions today.
Absolutely. Yeah, Marcel, welcome. Introduce you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, my name is Marcel. I'm working for a consulting company called Sepago in Cologne. I'm a Microsoft Azure MVP, and my famous Azure services are Azure Virtual Desktop, for sure, and Microsoft Log Analytics, and not only for logging computer stuff, also for logging other kind of data. Yeah, and thanks for having me here today.
And I'm really sure that you make all with Log Analytics, and you make so great projects in the past. I see really interesting projects in your daily business.
And welcome our host master, Gregor.
Who's this guy? Who lets it break out?
Yeah, hi and welcome. And you are wondering why we are all sitting together, and this is why the MVP Summit is running these days. And we have the idea to meet us all here in a small town called Bergisch Gladbach.
If you call it Bergisch, it sounds pretty cool.
DC. Is it not like Mountain Gladbach?
That's cool. Yeah, and we looking some interesting session all the night, and on the day.
And the newest news from MVP Summit are under NDA. So sorry, no news today.
Did you have seen everything?
I've seen everything. all the sessions.
Also the upcoming sessions.
Absolutely. And we are open for your question from projects, from all about Azure. So feel free to ask us your questions, and we will answer hopefully all of your questions from projects, technical questions, whatever. And we have some questions in our forms, and I will start with Eric.
Oh no. Okay. Let's start.
How important is automation in your projects?
Automation in my projects. It's pretty funny because it's one of my favorite topics that I'm also talking about at a lot of conferences. And I started to talk about the click cloud approach that is like brought to most of the customers by there is a sales representative, and it doesn't matter if it's Microsoft or if it's Google or whomever, and they say, oh, go to our fancy portal, and then you can click something, and bam, now you have cloud. That might be okay if you just want the VM, but if you really want to set up an environment, and if you want to especially take care of naming, of security, of compliance things, and if you want to follow up what has been changed, then automation plays a more and more important role. Because to be honest, if you try to do such things just in the portal and just by clicking, we all know we're doing mistakes. We do not remember, do I have to use this prefix or another one? And so you will end up in a totally messed up situation. So automation is key. And in the end, it doesn't matter how you do it. So even if you start with bare metal PowerShell or with a pure Azure CLI, but you have a structured way to create things, you have a way to implement certain rules about naming, about security, and so on. So that's pretty important. The interesting thing is that most people understood already that automation is important. So we have a lot of demand in projects about, can we automate this? And it goes even that far that people are looking into marketplace solutions, where you can have just like a marketplace, click a button and then deploy something to Azure. But what's the difficulty is the backend. Like, what do I use? There are so many tools these days. I said it already, PowerShell, CLI, then you have Terraform, Bicep, JSON. What do I do, and how do I bring all those things together? And these are the challenges that we are tackling in projects over and over and over again. But yeah, automation is pretty important. And if you are not automating right now, and even if you're just, I don't know, playing around with 10 VMs or so, think about it, because it's really helpful.
Thanks, and I love your explanation. And I see, I can always recommend to use automation in the project, and it's not important. It's a big project, it's a small project. Use automation for your daily tasks and for your daily business.
But and that's also important. Don't overdo it, because I also see that if you just deploy something once at a time, like your big central network environment, that you will maybe slightly change, but that's nothing that you will reproduce 10 times, 1,000 times, 100 times. Don't try to over-engineer it and then make everything in a way that you could reuse it for 5,000 different environments. Sometimes the easy approach can also be the good approach, as long as it's automated.
80-20.
Yeah, 80-20, yeah, absolutely.
That's your golden rule.
My golden rule is 80-20.
Yeah. Perfectly. So I will jump a little bit over the questions, so feel free to ask your question, and I will go over to Thomas.
Yeah.
And we have seen the acquisition of CloudKnox for Microsoft in the past.
Yeah.
And can you explain what it means and what is CloudKnox, and what are the benefits from CloudKnox in coming to Azure AD and to security?
Yeah, sure. So I guess it was late summer last year. Microsoft has completed the acquisition of CloudKnox, and now it's part of the identity portfolio by Microsoft, or it becomes a part of the portfolio. And what makes it really interesting, in my opinion, and one of the most interesting products for this year, we have a new product category in Azure AD, and that's the Cloud Infrastructure Entitlement Management. And that means we have the opportunity, and that is really special with CloudKnox, that we can manage privilege management or privilege access across all of the big three cloud providers. So we have Azure support, Google Cloud, and AWS. But in the end, what is the use case for that? So let's think about assigning privilege permissions. And back in the good old days of Active Directory, there was a software when they said, hey, we need domain admin permissions to run our application. Otherwise, we have no idea if that's working or not. I think everyone know the issues about that. And of course, that happens also with Azure AD and API permissions, or permissions in the Azure RBAC roles. So every time we assign highly privileged permissions, and maybe there's less permissions also working for the use cases. So what we have a gap, in my opinion, and that is what CloudKnox address in their solution. We have some permissions that are assigned and permissions that are really in use by application, by service principal. And those gap between assigned and used permissions is a potential risk, because something or someone, because it also works for privileged users, has more privileged permissions as needed. And so this is a risk, and this risk can be mitigated because CloudKnox analyzes, or it takes care on the use permission, figure out the gap, and you are able to reduce the assigned permissions because of the analysis from CloudKnox. And there's a couple of other things that are included in this solution, but in the end, that's the core functionality of CloudKnox. And around that feature, you can build a real cool infrastructure entitlement management for your multi-cloud environment. And that's, I think, a really interesting solution that comes to Azure AD.
Cool. And do you think it's really important to using CloudNox when it will be available for Azure AD?
Yeah, I guess for especially if you're in a multi-cloud environment, but also if you have just Azure or Microsoft 365, because the most people have not the holistic view about the permissions and are understanding how they will be used. But even, and that I think that it's the really hard case, you have a lot of different cloud platforms, it becomes more and more complicated. And you know the sentence, Azure AD is our control plane, right? It is. It is also the control plane if we're talking about more and more cloud providers. But of course, we have different RBAC models. And so this product allows really to have Azure AD as a control plane and have an analysis across all of the cloud platform. And that makes really the characteristic of a unified control plane, in my opinion.
Sounds really good. So I think I have to take a look a little bit deeper into CloudNox when it will be available for Azure AD. But I'm really looking forward, and yeah, it will be coming hopefully in the next couple of months.
And it shows again, if you build a solution around something that's missing in Azure, you can be acquired by Microsoft.
Yeah.
So hey, out there, if you have a good idea, just get started.
Marcel.
Yeah, Gregor.
I've also some into important session, and I know you are in the past in really big and different AVD projects. And yeah, what did you think is the most important to do for an AVD project?
Oh, there are several important to-dos and dependencies in AVD. I think the first way to go is always making a POC so that you can make sure that your application you're delivering in the front end to the user and the data you have in the back end, which is often on premises, like a database or file services, etc., that the performance between both front end and back end is working well. I think that is important. And I often see that is not a problem. For years, I thought that could be an issue if you have a front end application back end, that it is maybe too slow, but that is not often. So that is not a showstopper. Important is, and that is what you always told me, make a good governance, a good blueprint, a good landing zone, work with tax, work with policies, blueprints, management group. So make sure that your Azure environment is super good and super concepted, and that you also use the best practices from Microsoft, having this hub and spoke topology, which allows you to separate different workloads from each other. I think that is important, and then you can start growing with AVD and bringing your applications to the end user in a smart and easy way. And and then you have to take care for sure about the things which is more AVD related or desktop related, like scaling, stopping, starting, pre-starting, session host, and so on, so that you have the codes down and the performance very good if you need the performance. In short.
I really like your explanation, and I really like also the short info about the landing zone design, governance, and so on. So it's really great. And you have give us some insights about the network design. So, and I will go over to Eric. How did what did you think is important in the network design in Azure?
And it's pretty funny, because I was about to interrupt Marcel and say, "Oh, he said HubSpoke," and it's pretty funny because I see a lot of discussions about this and a lot of misconceptions, because what people are mostly looking at when they start with the Azure journey is cost. They try to avoid cost, and then if you think about this HubSpoke model, so if you don't know it, you have one network connected to another network, and you have to pay for the data transfer between those two networks. It's not super expensive, but if you have a lot of data transfer, there is some cost involved. And then I have a lot of customers complaining about, "Oh, there's cost. No, we don't want that. We put everything into one virtual network because that's easier, and that's not so complex, and that's not so expensive." And then this is exactly where the discussion comes in. Should we talk about cost when it comes to cloud projects, or should we talk about benefits? And I'm personally someone who likes to talk about benefits more than about cost. because I'm absolutely willing to pay €1 more if I have a bigger benefit out of it. And yeah, the networking thing is quite interesting just because of two different angles. The one thing is, normally no one goes into the cloud and then by a finger snip he has everything in the cloud. So you always have this hybrid connection where you have at least your old data center, or maybe some clients, some notebooks that have to connect somehow. So that's one of the bigger challenges, and there's a lot of things to consider about VPN, or maybe even ExpressRoute, or even ExpressRoute Direct. And this really depends then on your speed, bandwidth, availability, latency, and so on. What are your requirements there? Also has something to do with cost, but it's once again second. And that's one part of the Azure design, like how do I reach Azure? And we all agree that the least optimized solution is to put a VM there and put a public IP on it, and hey, now we can all access it, CPIA. And the second piece is really the inside of Azure. And the most important thing to consider about this is to change networks in Azure afterwards is a nightmare. Mm-hmm. So as soon as you have created the first networks and you have built the first peers and you have your VPN gateway and whatever, and then you think like, oh, I miscalculated my subnet sizes, I have to change them. Mm-hmm. That actually means you have to break down most of the things that you have built. At least you have to stop the peerings to change your address spaces. But if there are VMs in, then you have to switch the VMs potentially into another subnet and so on. So that's a big mess. This is why I always try to get my customers to think about networking first, plan a little bit bigger than they think they will grow, because it's automatically, if you start using Azure, you will use a bit more and it will grow and grow. And that's the thing. And then if you have a proper network design, if you have some, let's say, free space in your back where you say, okay, there are some networks that I planned already for future use, then you're pretty much bulletproof to build this. And then it depends on a little bit of the security requirements. Which kind of firewall do you want to have in there? How do you allow your applications to talk to the internet or to be talked to from the internet? Do you want to do this via a central gateway, or do you allow application level ingress and egress? That's an all discussions, but let's say the fundament should be in. And yeah, one of the most common things that we see is the hub-spoke model. Also see more and more interest into Azure Virtual WAN, especially if you have multiple global hubs, but still comes with some configuration challenges compared to, let's say, traditional network setups. This is why you see still both. Yeah.
Thanks, and you named it, and the really challenge here is the network design is not, when you have designed it, it's not so flexible as you can think about cloud. Yeah. So when you have designed it, it's really static, and to change some things, to change some subnet sizes or whatever, it's really a challenge to disconnect your devices and to move it over and then to resize the subnet. Yeah.
And think about it, you have to break a peering, which will actually mean your machines in the spoke are not able to communicate to the hub. Really. Yeah. So you need a downtime, not just a maintenance window, you need a downtime for your application in the worst case. And that's something we all try to avoid as good as possible.
And I think that is also the reason why the network design, similar to the question about how is my design of subscription separation or naming convention, is one of the real beginning fundamentals that you have to design for your cloud environments, because all of these things can be changed and it will be really a mess over the years if you have not a good design.
How important is this for the AVD projects?
Yeah, it's important in the same way. I think there's no difference if you do AVD or if you do what you're always doing.
the workload is the second step. Huh?
Database and so on. Yeah, that is so. If you configure a name, and even for a virtual machine, the name is static, and you cannot change it in an easy way. Yeah, you can change it, create a new VM with a new name and reattach the disk. That is an option. In AVD, that is not so much important for the virtual machine, because mostly you are creating virtual machine, deleting virtual machine in an automated way, for sure.
Hopefully.
We have a question from Melanie, and hi, Melanie. She is asking. She's asking, what is the preferred environment to develop automation scripts? More the tooling question, VS Code or the ISE, or PowerShell Core, Windows PowerShell.
I personally prefer Notepad.
I think not seen Notepad in the last couple of days.
No, really?
Terraform.
Come on. But the thing is, in the end, it really depends on your preferences. So I pretty much love using VS Code because it's easy, it's lightweight. You have a ton, or not a ton, a million of extensions that are really, really helpful. Even when it comes to like small extensions like Prettyfire that help you to structure your code, to make code look better and more readable to others. So that's something I use, and as it's pretty open, and no matter if you do a PowerShell script, if you do a shell script, if you start using Terraform, if you want to use Pulumi, doesn't matter because you will be able to handle it in VS Code. I still see a lot of clients using the classical PowerShell ISE for their PowerShell scripts because like let's call it the traditional way, without meaning it anyhow bad, but that's the way how most of them learned it, because there was no VS Code at this time. And still, Visual Studio has the touch of a developer. So that's like, Visual Studio is for those developer guys. I'm just writing some PowerShell codes for my infrastructure. So I'll take the ISE. I think both is fine in the end. I personally prefer VS Code. What about you?
I'm also with you. I'm really a fan of Visual Studio Code and PowerShell Core because of the flexibility and the universal approach that you have with that. For example, you can use, if you are familiar with Visual Studio Code, you will be a big fan of GitHub code spaces. And I really love to have the flexibility to run my IDE in a browser, maybe from my iPad or from any device. And if it comes to PowerShell Core, and we are talking about pipelines, I have the full freedom of choosing the host that is executing my code. And to say, okay, I've got a MacBook and I like to test my script, or running it into a Linux-based agent pool. So that's really cool. And
I had this just recently where the client started with Windows VMs to execute his code.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then we figured out that the creation of the Windows VMs takes longer than a standard Linux VM, which is not a surprise, but they were somehow reaching an issue on machine creation takes too long. So they switched the automation agents to Linux, and here we go. You're still able to run this stuff.
But before we say, hey, just go ahead with PowerShell Core and everything is fine, there are some disadvantages in my opinion. So if you have some traditional modules from Microsoft, we say traditional for everything that is old, or what is it like that? No, just kidding. So if you have to have dependencies to some outdated or not regular updated modules, that could be really a challenge. But more and more over the last 2 years, I see more and more support for PowerShell Core as well.
And especially if you're working with Azure resources, I think it's pretty good.
And with Azure AD, hey, there's the new Microsoft.craft module. So because Azure AD doesn't work, the module with PowerShell Core.
Mm-hmm.
So we all know Marcel is the founder of AVD Admin and Project Hydra. So what is your preferred tooling engine for the whole environment?
Eclipse.
Eclipse.
No, what I prefer is that depends on the language I'm programming in. So what I use for PowerShell, I sometimes use the ISE to easily check if a script or a small script works. And I also use VS Code. I use VS Code for my front-end programming, for example, for Hydra, where I have to work with a lot of files to write an Angular front-end. And at the same time, I have open Visual Studio to develop my back-end or my web app environment, my controllers, that is done in C#. So I have both open, and that works really good to work on the back-end and front-end at the same time. So that are my favorite, Visual Studio Code and Visual Studio. And what I sometimes need, even for Markdown, is for sure Notepad++. I think Notepad++ is the most deployed application in the world, I would bet. Even for any demonstration, Notepad++ is deployed. So that is what I like, and I also use, and that is cool, Visual Studio Code. If you search for something in files, you can use the Windows file search, which is not so fast. What I do, I open Visual Studio Code, open a folder, and use the search of Visual Studio Code to search through different files, independent of the appendix of the file.
Cool. So I've seen, or I have a little funny story about this. So I worked in the past with Marcel, and he has his own office room, and I got some of the days in this room, and Marcel only used a notebook. And I'm really struggling how we can develop things only on a
Standard notebook.
Yeah, on a standard notebook without a screen. It's really
cool. I have some experience. I remember the old time where we flew to events and so on. That was where I often use only a notebook in the not in the airplane.
In the speaker room or whatever.
Speaker room or something else where you're waiting for the next train or fly, and then to program something, because you can fill out sometimes very useful. You have. And I know, and at home I have a big widescreen, and that makes more fun having Visual Studio on the left side and Visual Studio Code on the right side.
Okay,
that makes more fun, But it works in both ways.
Can you go back to a single screen?
I did that here.
Okay, today. You're right.
I do this all here. I also did this here, but I really must say it's for me it's challenging to like flip back and forth between windows, and I like my 2 monitors at home, and I can shift left, right, and
ignore your monitor.
Over the last,
make it black make it in blind way.
And the thing is, over the last 2 years, we were at home. We always had this super fancy setup at home, and everything was working. And then you're immediately out of your comfort zone as soon as you're stepping out of your home. So it's something we have to get used to again.
Melanie has some recommendation for tooling for you, Marcel. I'm not sure. Boo VS Code implementation has a good Markdown implementation. I don't have heard about. Did you have seen it?
No, I don't know it. I don't know it, but I will check it.
Mermaid has also.
What is Mermaid? Anyone ever heard of it?
Mermaid is also a tool, script engine. I mean,
not a fish.
Not a fish.
Okay, so next time we have to invite Melanie to explain what Mermaid is. I guess.
Yeah,
but I can only strongly recommend, if you are using VS Code for Markdown, to install the Microsoft Docs extension, because Microsoft is using internally VS Code to write down the documentation of Microsoft Docs. And I personally prefer to write also blog posts in Markdown, because the GitHub pages,
rules.
And I really like to have this live preview feature with all the create a table of content stuff and so on. So really a good idea to have that installed if you're working with Markdown.
Sounds good. So we will come back more to the identity side.
Oh, okay.
And Thomas, what did you think? Is PIM important to you for using in Azure AD, and it's a kind for all identities or more related to admin accounts? What is your preferred way for PIM?
In general, it depends. So classic consultant answer, but
I like it.
I think, and that is similar to what I said about Claude Knox. So if we are talking about privileged access, and that means technical privilege access, but maybe also high sensitive business access, that could be also a use case, you should think about minimizing the attack surface. So if you have the whole day, the full permissions, I think it is very risky, or it could be an increased chance that an attacker get access or compromise the identity during the time when the account holds these permissions. And to use something like Azure PIM to have just-in-time access is a great idea, and that is, I think, absolutely required for high critical Azure AD and Azure RBAC roles. But there's also something called privileged access groups, and that gives you the opportunity to have just-in-time membership or ownership of a group. And with that in mind, you can use PIM for every privilege access that is assigned to a group. And that makes it really, really interesting for most cases, because if we're thinking about RBAC systems, there's not only Azure AD or Azure RBAC. We have in M365, I guess, 5, 6 or more different RBAC models. And unfortunately, there are some side effects. So they sometimes it needs a little bit more time until the permissions get effective in the environment. You can use PAG, so privileged access groups, also in multi-cloud environments. So for AWS or other scenarios. So this is something what I can only recommend to have a look on that. But on the other side, always consider where are the people. Who are the people that can manipulate the groups, which are the principle of assigning the privilege rights. And even if you're using Azure PIM, there could be a privilege escalation path. And so, always think who are the persons that can manage groups or manage PIM permissions.
And I think that's an important topic. Just because you're using a tool or a feature, it doesn't make your environment automatically safe, because that's something I see quite often. It's like, oh, we activated PIM, we're safe now. No, you're not. We activated Azure Security Center, so now everything is safe. No, you're not. So you have to take care of it. You have to think about it. You have to consider who's actually able to administrate it. And so that's a pretty important topic.
Yeah, and that is what we figured out and published in the last Azure AD attack and defense playbook that I wrote together with Sam and Pooh. Because we have think about, hey, is there a chance for Azure AD Connect server to take over groups that are privileged assigned in Azure AD or in the Azure RBAC? Because then you have the privilege escalation path from on-prem to the cloud. And the most people think about, hey, there are attack paths from cloud to on-prem. That was the most concern over the last years. But now with Nobelium and other attacks, we see more and more there are compromised on-premises environment and the chance to leverage the permissions to the cloud. And this is fortunately today not in scope about ransomware attacks and so on. So mostly the attackers stop in the on-premises environment. But as soon we've got more and more attackers that are looking for escalation paths to the cloud, that becomes very critical. And that was the case in the Nobelium attacks by persistence access in service principles and so on. And so, always thinking about who other persons or attack paths in my environment.
Thanks. And I think we have to think more about PIM and to use this in our cloud projects. And I will come to Marcel. And I know you love log analytics. Log analytics.
Hashtag. That's good.
And what was your favorite and important project in the past about log analytics?
That is not one project. If you ask me what was my favorite and my biggest log analytics project, and it's not one. But what I did really early, a few years ago, with log analytics, it was starting building an agent to collect data from end-user computing environments, storing it into log analytics, making all the visualization and workbooks to show how the data are connected together. That is maybe one of my important projects I made, and it was also the funniest. But what I also love and what I did, I used it as a scenario for showing that on summits or on some events, user groups.
Can remember.
Yeah, that was.
And I know all my Twitter feeds.
It was writing a little agent running as an Azure web job, which was connected to the Twitter API, which is pretty easy to do. And the agent listened for some special hashtags like Microsoft Azure and so on. And the agent stored all the data, not in a SQL database because that is too slow, too expensive, and so on. I stored the data all in log analytics, all the data about a single tweet, and you get a lot of data for each single tweet from Twitter,
Mhm.
and I was able to collect around 4 to 6 or 8,000 different tweets a day and store in Log Analytics. And I use this scenario to show how to build visualization in Log Analytics and how to filter down for location, for Twitter handles, or for hashtags in that. And yes, I use it to show the auditorium what was Gregor's tweets frequency over the time related to different hashtags, and you could see exactly when Gregor was on holiday. Yeah, but that was an old project, and for sure I don't do this these days where all the data is
I'm not
protected. You don't trust me now. No. All public data, and for sure. But that is fun. Log Analytics, or like Gregor said, Love Analytics. It's not only for storing computer-related data or logs or something. You can store anything in. Like I did this with Twitter, or I do this today with my current counter. So what coming from the grid, the amperes, and so going into my house, I measure it and store this data also in Log Analytics, and that is cool. You can then work with all the data in a really fast way to visualize, see if something goes wrong, and get also alerted.
And so the cool thing is that Log Analytics is really extensible to everything and also connectable to everything. So I've built some crazy dashboards in Power BI.
Yeah.
And before sending data into Log Analytics, like information that you get from Azure Resource Graph, put it into Log Analytics, and then was able to show a dashboard on current usage in Azure, how many VMs, how many whatever. So and it's really kind of limitless because you can put everything in. You have the standard connection, just put a JSON data in, and Log Analytics will take it and will give you a chance to pull it out, to make some visualizations on it, to connect it to services like Power BI. That's pretty cool.
And even Excel. So any Microsoft Office application like Excel, Word, and for sure Power BI has a connector which you can use to connect to a Log Analytics container, and that is pretty cool to even get this old-styled Excel files based on Log Analytics data.
And the next time, I really like to see in your demos that you are using cognitive services to analyze Gregor's tweets. What are the most common words, or what is the baseline or anomalies in the tweets?
I had this.
I think I'm a good project.
I exactly did this for a customer 6 years ago or so. We collected tweets that was for getting an idea of how advertising is working in on the streets in the field. And we also use the cognitive services to get an index. Is it a friendly tweet from the pronouncement, from the text, or is it negative or neutral? And we use this data from the cognitive services, from the Twitter API, and build a visualization map with Power BI to see, for example, for Cologne, how is the feeling after a football game of the first FC Cologne, if they won or not, around the area.
Yeah, but you have to choose maybe next time a football club that has more also wins in that.
like you say, thin ice. Yeah.
I'm not into football. I'm out of this game.
Me too.
Yeah, so I can say, when you have questions also to Log Analytics, please keep in mind.
Costo.
Yes, also really a pro at this. And I know Thomas is also a pro. And he is working in the past many times also with Sentinel, with Log Analytics.
Yeah.
And what was your best project in this field? Or did you have another one in the identity field? What was your best project in the last couple of months or years?
Yeah, so
your favorite project?
Yeah, there were so many really cool solutions, and especially if we are working with Sentinel, you have really interesting stuff because it is not only about visualization of raw logs from like security events and so on. It's also about writing the analytics rules to detect suspicious behavior and so on. And there are really cool stuff. Even if you have customer use cases where you say, okay, I like to see anomalies in sign-in events, and you have the raw data to do that. with all the cool features of Custo KQL. But maybe one of the things that I'm currently working on, because I think that is also an interesting use case, I ingest at the moment all the RBAC entries to Log Analytics and build some complex queries to see if someone has privileged access to a resource, and maybe this is an account that is not designed or configured to have this access, and maybe see also some access, but original there was no RBAC role assigned to the account. And if you have, and it's all about raw event, as far you have a good quality, a good source about your events, I think everything is possible in KQL. It's just a question of time to figure out the queries. I remember back to a blog post about SSPR, so self-service password reset. I had contacted Marcel because I was reading out about a query where we have correlated attempts to reset the password, but it was not. It was used for suspicious sign-in from a location. So correlate different signals together. And so Marcel is really a pro in writing queries. But nowadays, everyone that is working with Sentinel or is working in the security space with Microsoft 365 Defender, also they have to become pro in KQL. So it's now time. If you don't have learned KQL, it's really cool. It's a lot of fun. And maybe if you have no use case yet, just use the tweets from to do some analysis.
Still available from the last couple of years.
For free.
Many holiday pictures, so it's also a good project for cognitive service. Feel free
To figure out where you were.
But I know Eric used an easy way with Penguin.
With Find Penguin,
Yeah.
I pretty much like this app.
Yeah.
Don't want to make some advertisement here, but like we're using this to track our travel routes and share with the family, and you can always have the route, the photos, and some text in a combination. That's pretty the thing that I use. But hey, you can also use Twitter.
So Eric, what was your favorite project in the past? And I know you do a lot of projects.
Yeah, I think that's the main problem now. choose one. What's quite interesting, and it brings us back to one of the initial questions about networking. I have a lot of projects these days around networking. I've been involved into 2 projects where we really implemented ExpressRoute Direct, which I remember at the time when they announced it. It was like Scott Guthrie will come with a cable into your house and plug it in, and so it was like, oh, that's super special, and that's only for the top 10 of this world. And I see more and more interest into this, because one of the biggest challenges of ExpressRoute is the missing encryption. And in ExpressRoute Direct, you have the chance to do MACsec encryption on your own devices, which is pretty interesting, especially if you're in a regulated environment and so. So let's say these are the projects where I also learned a lot about technology layers I never wanted to get into. But that was pretty fancy and pretty awesome to see, and also how all those components play together, like the data center of the client, maybe the data center provider around this, then you have the carrier, and then you have Microsoft. And so that was, let's say, pretty cool to see this and to be in this. On the other side, and I know that now everybody will start laughing, is logic apps. I really enjoy using logic apps for things it's probably not been intended to initially. So I use it in private projects as well, in the customer projects, because as everybody knows, I'm not a developer. So like when Marcel says like, I take my Visual Studio and my Visual Studio Code and I do my front end here and my back end here. My big question is already, how do I connect the front end to the back end? Like, too difficult for me. And it's super cool because in logic apps, I don't need this whole stuff. I can say, okay, if that happens, I want to do this. And then I really got better and better and better using logic apps. And now use it for like in customer projects, the thing that I mentioned, like bringing things into log analytics and querying data from somewhere. And so sometimes did this with logic apps because it's pretty powerful and you don't need a lot of knowledge. So at least you should know what it is and you should know how REST API works. That's something I can handle. But beyond this, logic apps is pretty helpful. And it goes even further, like help yourself to automate some administrative tasks. That's a thing where I see also some motion in replace traditional PowerShell scripts with, for example, logic apps, or things that you do every week, every month, go into the portal, click around, build it with a logic app. And that's, if you push it a bit further into like your day-to-day work, where you could use the Power Automate features and stuff, I think there's a lot of investment and interest going into those low-code, no-code situations. For me personally, logic apps was one of the door openers into that area. I'm using this pretty frequently these days.
Yeah, I've seen some interesting sessions from you on some community events. That
That
was
also,
really great to use logic app also in your Azure automation daily work.
Yeah.
One short question for you, Eric,
Oh.
and it's more related to the network. And we have discussed this, and I see this also a lot in my project. All customers think about private link is the best way to secure your network. And it's going more to a traditional way in the cloud, and I'm not really like this approach. But what did you think about private link? And yeah, I see. What is your...
And you guys, we know we're here for quite some days, and we had the discussion about legacy and legacy management. Traditional several times. I understand why it's necessary. And it's not just private link. There are some other features around this, like dedicated hosts and whatever, where I personally think over the last 5 years, we tried to get people to modernize their stuff, get rid of the old stuff. And I see Microsoft over and over again coming in and say like, hey, you can run your Windows Server 2008 in the cloud and you don't have to change anything. And for me, it's a question, why don't we give them help to change it instead of giving them something to stick to the old stuff? And it's pretty much the same with the whole private link discussion. I totally understand why it's necessary, because if you're building line of business applications that are only used internally, why should you access them via a public interface? If you have an AS400 in your on-prem data center and you need data from this, how should you connect to it? Because it most probably has no web API for you to get to. So I know where it is. I personally am someone who says, like, let's think about how we can modernize this, because actually private link and a lot of the other features are just helping us to postpone the modernization. And I'm a little bit afraid that in, 5 years, 10 years, we're sitting there, have still built everything on network security. And that's in the end the thing that we're building there. We're going back to the traditional network security, all the things that Thomas is talking about. We don't care because everything is private. I have my firewall, I have my good subnet and my bad subnet, or network address space. And nobody's thinking about how to modernize it. So the application will still be connected to your old Active Directory. It will still use LDAP and maybe NTLM version 1, I don't know. So there's no change needed, because we make it so easy to stick to the old things while using the cloud. And once again, I understand why it's necessary, because this is how you catch the big fish. And it's easier to just use old stuff in the cloud instead of innovating and changing and transforming. But yeah, I'm really critical about this, because I think we're just postponing and we're pushing our problems to the future.
A little bit, yeah.
And there will be a point in time where we have to take care of them. And I'm not sure, and I said it already yesterday, guys, we have seen with the Corona situation that there was an immediate impact, and we needed to jump on it, and we were required to use Teams and get into home office solutions. And think about all the home office discussions we had the years before, where clients were thinking about, and maybe, and we could, and potentially, and just bam, over a week, everybody started using remote, and it was never really well planned. And I'm a bit afraid that in 5 years, we have all those private endpoints, whatever, and then there's whatever reason that makes us, we have to go public, we have to go modern authentication, we have to get rid of the old stuff. Then we're all sitting there and have to change things in a week, in a month, in a year, and then it's like, oh my god. So that's my concerns about this whole topic.
Absolutely agree to this, and absolutely agreed. Thomas, did you think when you heard about this, all the related stuff more to the network side, what is your what did you see in your project? Is network also still a big topic, or is the identity also coming to this topic and to this big topic? It needs to be also seen and to be secure, good, and have an identity solution, identity security, all this stuff. It is also really important from the customer itself, or it's more a project you give the customer the recommendation to take also care of this?
Yeah, I guess there are several angles to have a view on network as a parameter when it comes to identity. So, for example, many of the organization has their journey to something called zero trust, right? And of course, most organizations start with, hey, okay, maybe I have a modern client in the future and relying more about strong authentication and device identity, like a device compliance and Azure AD joint only. But they mostly start with, hey, I've got my trusted IP range and I exclude them from MFA, right? So that was for many organizations a step on the road to get a real modern and zero trust approach for the modern identity. But on the other side, there's still some aspects when the IP address or network becomes an essential part of our authentication or authorization decision. I'd like to give 2 examples. One of them, everyone is happy. Hey, we have got conditional access for workload identities. Mm-hmm. And the only thing that I can use as a condition for my workload identities is an IP address.
Yeah.
And I say, hey, okay, how I cannot explain that to my customers? So I talk all the day. Hey, don't rely on your IP address, zero trust, and so on. So of course, there are some scenarios where IP address is a condition, and we should take care which clients or servers are able to get their IP address, and we can use that as a condition because no other condition is available. And if it comes to service principle, we have no require MFA, we have no require device compliance, so that is needed. But I think it's very important to explain that why sometimes we are thinking about network parameters still in a modern identity environment. And if it comes to private endpoint, I have also an opinion about private endpoints, because when it comes to key vaults, I would always recommend to say, hey, key vault with very sensitive secrets or certificates, and it will be used only by a virtual machine. Hey, please don't give them public endpoint access to the key vault and restrict them to the virtual machine. And now it comes also some questions from customers. Hey, why we are living in a zero trust world? Why I should take care on network? So, of course, network is a condition and can be used in the decision of authentication as part of conditional access, but it should not be the primary conditional factor. I think that is the real important point. And then please go ahead with modern identity and really zero trust by evaluate and verify conditions that relying directly on data, device, and identity, and not on your old boundary that is the network. That I think is the wrong way. But it could be additional evaluation during conditional access.
I like that approach. Mm-hmm. So we have a question here, and I think it can be for Marcel or for Eric. Question about micro-segmentation with NSG. It is a lot of management overhead. Any good way to deal with that? With NSGs?
Well, it depends.
As always.
Let's use it. So yes, working with NSGs, and especially with NSGs only, is a big pain because the management of NSGs is still bound to one-by-one configuration, pretty difficult. There is a way, let's say we have now certain providers out there in the world. Don't want to say any names because I'm even not sure which of them is currently really capable. That are able to also manage parts of the Azure environment. That are able to manage rules in an Azure firewall. I heard about some that are even going into an NSG level. Not sure how good or how bad they are working, but this could be a solution. From my perspective, one interesting thing is there again automation, because like if you build a module for your segmented workloads, then you can easily auto-include NSG, and you can easily auto-include your favorite rules, your standard route to your central firewall, and whatever you want to have there. If you want to do it manually, yes, it's a pain in the you-know-where. The big question is really, do I have to use NSGs? Or can I do it just with a bare routing rule and then bring it back to a more central instance like an Azure firewall or a third-party instance? That's a question of the overall design. But yeah, let's say NSGs can be important and are important. From a design perspective, always think about the other services that you have around there. Because what I've seen is like I publish my web server and protect it with an NSG. That's not the way to go. Use a web application firewall, use a load balancer, use like the things before that help you to protect it. The NSG is not the good thing to protect a workload.
But it's a start. It's a start.
It's a start.
And even if you start with Azure Virtual Network and even the hub-spoke topology, I use NSG, for example, to separate different ports at the ends and IP ranges from one spoke or subnet or VNet, to make sure that all the traffic is crossing which I expect in this environment. So that is a good thing to start. And what you can also do, not for configuring NSG, but to get in feedback if another administrator is reconfiguring an NSG. We built this in one project to send an alert into a Teams channel if someone adds a public IP address, change an NSG rule or something else. And then it's not perfect like a firewall, which you can configure from at best from one central console, which takes care about your Azure and on-premises firewalls. But that is a good way to start. Better than nothing.
And one thing that you could have a look at is the still in preview, the virtual network manager. That could help with the management, especially in a hub-spoke model, that you don't have to go one-on-one into those things.
Going to the end.
Oh,
Sometime. So
sorry,
the time we're running out of time. So last question for Marcel, and I hope you have also a short answer, maybe. And I know
you know Thomas.
What is your security approach in AVD projects? What is the most important thing, or what is the low-hanging fruit to secure your AVD environment?
Customize your image, remove or disable all the unnecessary services like GPS location or something else you don't use if your VM is running in a data center. Use policies, for example, from Endpoint Manager, Intunes, or from the native legacy but funny group policy. That is important to use.
Did you avoid group policy in the project?
No. I think it often as well. And use group policy templates, which are downloadable from institutes in the US or from the EU, which gives you a good basic configuration and disable some services or protocols, even which are not secure right now. So that is a good way to start to secure an AVD environment.
Thanks. So I think we're going to an end. And last question for today: what is your important thing for the day? I hope we will also look at the last MVP summit sessions. But what is your I'm not sure.
Like lunch?
Lunch would be a good thing. Yeah?
What do we do next? Yes. What do we do next? I hope we're going out and we'll eat some.
I think so.
Someone?
Not someone. Let's try with something.
Love analytics.
So it was a pleasure to meet you all.
Thank you.
And
thanks everyone for joining.
Coming to an end, and I am really happy to have the last day with you here in this beautiful room.
Mention.
then hopefully we see each other, but also you out there in one of the next upcoming conferences.
Yeah,
Actually,
that'll be
it's also a good hint, because the next one is the Global Azure Conference, and we have also live conference, and we stay in Bonn and take a look at our Azure Bonn meetup site. So we'll have really great guests. The Marcel is also there. Thomas is there. Eric is something.
Some private obligation.
So yeah, feel free to take a look, and yeah, thanks for joining us today, and I hope we see you soon again.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye bye.